Part 2 of why sleeping in might just save your life. After talking to the bus driver, my mom came back looking terrified, but she didn't say anything about it and told me to finish getting ready for school. At the time, I didn't know what happened, but my mom would end up telling me a few years later. When she went to the second bus, she found out it was being driven by my regular driver and it was full of other kids that are usually on my route. By the way, the other bus was empty. My mom asked the driver about the substitute driver and about him calling in sick. He tells her that he never called in sick and there is no substitute driver on his route. The driver immediately called dispatch in a panic and told my mom to go inside and call the police and report this incident, which she did without me knowing at the time. There was absolutely no one doing my driver's route that day. Whoever this was most likely a kidnapper who had targeted me. I never heard anything about it again, not even if someone else had ended up being picked up by this mysterious fake bus driver. But chances are, had I gotten on that bus, I would never have made it to school or back home. And if we hadn't overslept on that specific day, I would have been on that bus. This is why you should never let your Uber driver cancel your ride while you're still in the car. I went dancing with some friends one night and got really drunk by midnight. My phone was dead and I was so drunk that I barely remember my friend calling me an Uber. I can vaguely remember them helping me in the car and telling me to get home safe. That's when he asked me how my night was and if I smoked. At this point, I sort of just slurred out that I did sometimes. He then offered me a J and this is when I started to get nervous and started paying attention. I tell him something like I'm really tired and just ready to go home. He keeps insisting and once again I say something not exactly like no, but not a yes, which he takes as a yes. I'm so drunk I can barely see straight or speak clearly. That's when he says, okay, I have to cancel the ride really quick because I can't give it to you while I'm on the clock. It takes me a second to realize how dangerous that is, and by the time I start to say something, he's canceled the ride and pulled over in the middle of nowhere. At this point, I'm panicking, I'm taking fake hits, and I'm thinking to myself how I can get out of this situation. After it's done, I tell him I can always call another Uber and he doesn't have to take me home. But he says he still has my address and he'll take me. As he starts driving, I tell myself to calm down and that I'm being paranoid. But that's when I realize he's going farther north and passing every exit that could get me back to my apartment. Part 2 of why you should never let your Uber driver cancel the ride before it's over. As he passes the fourth exit, I'm thinking of how I can get him to take me home. That's when I tell him that my boyfriend is waiting on me. My driver said nothing, but he took the next exit and made a giant U-turn taking me home. Even as we're heading south, I'm still shaking and have my hand on the door handle, thinking about just hopping out at a red light the closer we get to my apartment. My phone is completely dead, but we're getting close to my apartment now. So once we get about 2 blocks from my apartment, I lie and tell him that it's easiest to stop here and he can let me out. Again, he doesn't say anything, but he does slow the car. I'm flooded with relief and even maybe a smile, but when I go to open the door, it's locked. I try to lift the lock mechanism manually, but it won't budge. I look at him to see what's up and he's got his head turned almost fully toward me, shoulders still facing the road, smiling at me. The worst fucking smile I've ever seen. It looked so mocking and it just did not reach his eyes at all. I just started crying and asking him to open the door. I was so freaked out and still very drunk, and thank God he did. I will never forget that sensation of vulnerability, not just being drunk in his car, but with no way to contact anyone. It was terrifying. Storytime about how my stalker defended me in a fight at a hot dog shop. A few years ago, when I was 19, I got a job at a hot dog shop. It had a phallic pun for a name in a somewhat shady area, and the shop was pretty well known and had some fantastically dark local lore. Rumors that the hot dogs were made out of horse meat, or that we had been closed down by the health inspector and reopened illegally circulated. None of it was true, but people kept coming back for our delicious hot dogs. The community was diverse and sometimes dangerous, but people looked out for each other. One shift, early in the morning, I was working the register when a man comes in. He had long dark hair and thick stubble covering most of the lower half of his face. The shop was busy, he ordered and stepped aside but kept chatting with me. I was used to this. In an area with a lot of nightlife, I got comfortable with drunk ramblings and people hitting on me. I felt safe as long as I was on the other side of the counter. He was talking about how all the other men in the shop were posers and how beautiful I was. He also told me that he's a chef at a nearby restaurant, but I gave him a fake name just to be safe. I started seeing him often. It wasn't uncommon to have regulars, some even on a first name basis, but when my coworkers told me he had come in looking for me, asking for me when I wasn't there, I started to feel uneasy. Part 2 of how my stalker defended me in a fight at a hot dog shop. Every time I saw him, he seemed to be more intoxicated than the last. He'd walk in and say, "Hey beautiful," or "Hey pretty girl," so casually as though it was really my name. One night I finished my shift at 2 a.m. and I saw him on the other side of the sidewalk, watching me and waving. I tried not to think about how long he might have been there. My manager walked me to my car that night. Then one Saturday around 3 a.m. the shop was booming. There was a 40-minute wait for french fries. The tiny shop floor was crowded with people who had rolled out of any one of the nearby nightclubs, drunk and starving. A big, bulky man in his mid to late 20s started getting in my face. He had been waiting 30 minutes for the fries he ordered. I kept apologizing, but that just made him angrier. I was desperately trying to plan an escape from my position against the back wall, behind the counter, to the front door where I could get a bouncer's attention. There was no hope. The store was too crowded. That's when I hear a sloppy but familiar voice saying, "Leave her alone," and my stalker emerges from the crowd. He was only 5'5", but he fronts up against the massive man and they start fighting. Luckily, the commotion caught a bouncer's eye who ran in and swiftly de-escalated the situation. After that, I got a job somewhere else and moved on. This is how a fortune teller saved my life. One night after work, my friend Abby and I decided to go out and grab a drink. On the way, Abby noticed a little hole-in-the-wall business that had a sign out front that said psychic readings. Abby's always doing spontaneous and super random things, so of course she pulled over as soon as she saw it and insisted that we go in. I was apprehensive at first, but she talked me into it. I never believed in this sort of thing, but I figured I'd go in to make Abby happy. As we walked in, we were greeted by a very old woman that reeked of cheap perfume. She brought us to the back room where I noticed 3 or 4 cats lounging about. She read Abby's palm first and told her a super generic fortune that sounded like she got it off of Google daily horoscopes. I couldn't help but to scoff. When it was my turn, she grabbed my hand and began reading my palm. She seemed to be taking forever with my reading. Then she looked up at me with a worried look, gripped my hand so hard that it hurt, and said, "You will receive something that doesn't belong to you in the coming months. It will be wet. Stay at a friend or family member's house that day, dear." I gave her a strange look and we left and went on with our night. Little did I know this piece of information would end up saving my life. Part 2 of how a fortune teller saved my life. Months went by since I saw the fortune teller. I never gave what she said a second thought. One morning I woke up and went to go check the mail. There was a package on my doorstep, but I hadn't ordered anything recently. There was a bad storm that day, and the package was soaked. After taking it inside, I noticed that the package wasn't mine and it had been delivered to the wrong address. This is when it clicked in my head, and I remembered what the crazy old fortune teller lady had told me. I'll receive something that isn't mine, it'll be wet, stay at a friend's house that night. I'm not gonna lie, I was a little freaked out. I thought to myself it was probably a coincidence and that packages get delivered to the wrong address all the time. But what she said stayed in the back of my mind all day. I decided to stay at my sister's house that night just to be safe. I went over to her house in the storm and we had a much needed girls' night. The next morning I went home and I was shocked. Sometime last night during the storm, the large tree in my front yard had fallen on my house right on top of my bedroom. It completely broke through the roof, destroying my room and the hall. I got back in my car and drove to the fortune teller's business to thank her. When I got there, her business had been closed down and she was nowhere to be found. To this day, I still believe that her warning saved my life. Story time about how I catfished my boyfriend. I'd been dating my boyfriend Ben for around a year. We were really happy and he even moved in with me in my apartment. Everything was going great and I thought he could be the one. However, one day my friend Lacey sent me a screenshot of my boyfriend on a dating app. At first, I was hoping that maybe it was an old account. I didn't want to jump to conclusions if it was from before we started dating. The pictures that he had on the account didn't seem to be recent ones. I wanted to ask him about it and I almost did, but I had to be sure that he wasn't trying to play me. I called my friend Lacey and told her to super like him on the app. She's really pretty and they've never met, so I knew that he would match with her if he was still active on the app. After a few days, nothing happened. He hadn't matched or messaged her. I was so relieved that I even bought him a new jersey I knew he'd been wanting. I felt dumb even questioning his loyalty until I got an update from Lacey a few days later. He had matched with her on the dating app and messaged her. I was so mad I was seeing red. I was so close to going into the next room and going off on him, but I decided that I wanted to get back at him in a different way. I called Lacey and explained to her that I wanted to set him up and asked for her login information on the app, which she gave me. This is when things got interesting. Part 2 of how I catfished my boyfriend. I downloaded the dating app, logged into Lacey's account, and began messaging Ben pretending to be her. I asked him if he was single, to which he said of course. He was being super flirty and saying some of the sweet things to her that he said to me. I told him I wanted to set up a date and meet, and he immediately agreed. It was on a day that I knew he was scheduled to work. When the day came, he lied to me and told me that he was going to work and might have to stay late. I met up with Lacey and a few of my other girlfriends and we got ready to catch him in the act. I messaged him and gave him Lacey's address where we were waiting for him. He messaged back when he arrived and Lacey went to the door and let him in. He walked in and saw me and all my friends and his jaw hit the floor. If anyone's ever seen a ghost, I'd imagine they looked like him when he walked in and saw us. He was so shocked and terrified, he just stood there not knowing what to say. The look on his face of complete guilt and shame was so gratifying. My friends and I immediately started yelling at him, calling him every name in the book, while some of my friends had their phones out recording us catching him red-handed. We pushed him out of the house, yelling at him while he took the walk of shame back to his car. We spent the rest of the evening back at my place getting all of his stuff out of my apartment. Hopefully he thinks twice about cheating on any girl again. Story time about how my online boyfriend hired a hitman off the dark web to kill me. I've always been a big PC gamer. When I was in high school, all I did was go to school, come home, and stay up way too late on my PC. It was like an escape for me and it was something that I really enjoyed. I was also one of those kids that dated online instead of in real life. I would usually block guys that would hit on me, but there was one that stood out. We met in a game and worked well together, so I decided to add him. He was really nice, always made me laugh, and he was a brilliant player. We got so close I gave him my phone number and added him on social media. One thing led to another and we started dating, even though we never actually met in person, although we were planning to. Things were going great until he started to get controlling. If I wanted to hang out with my friends in real life and skip a day in my room online, he would get mad. He would force me to FaceTime him when I was with my friends to make sure I wasn't with any guys. He demanded that I share my location with him at all times, and to give him all my passwords to my social media accounts, even my iCloud. When I finally stood my ground and told him no, he freaked out on me, which made me realize that this was heading south quickly. I told him I was starting to think that this might not work out between us. This is when things got crazy